Look, thanks very much both for joining. I mean, wanted to set the scene a little bit about the sort of EV, the European auto industry. It employs about 3.5 million people in manufacturing. It represents 10% of Europe's exports. A decade ago, it was pretty much the leading auto manufacturing industry in the world. Since then, I think China's doubled in size and is now the largest manufacturer of cars. But I think most importantly, the investments that we're seeing and in the shift to electric vehicles, the dominance that China and Asia has in the supply chain is really quite extraordinary. So whether it's graphite, where they're 90% of global supply, whether it's the cathode active material, the anodes, the actual battery cells themselves, where they're about 75%. And I think that's been driving, since 2020, I think China went from exporting 1 million vehicles globally to now 5 million, so huge jump in just 3 years. So it's, I think, a real challenge for Europe's, for Europe, a very important European industry. And it's great to have you both here to talk about it. Firstly, Reka, look, thanks very much for being here today. Congratulations. Renault was awarded EV Car of the Year, the new Scenic, which was great to see, especially because we're very much hoping that Verkor's first batteries, a portfolio company of ours and a French battery manufacturer, and Benoit and Cedric are here today, but Verkor's batteries will be in the EV Car of the Year, so that's really cool. And you also launched kind of a bit of a retro comeback, the electric Renault 5. So all of that this week, and you've managed to make time to be here with us. So thanks very much. But I guess first question for you, and maybe we're going to go slightly off piste from the questions that we had written down, but why is it sort of so hard for legacy automakers to make this transition to EV and do it profitably?
Well, actually, because we're a legacy company, right? Yeah. So we have a bag with a lot of learnings, and the newcomers, especially the startups or the ones that are raising in China and in the US, they have no constraints. They start from scratch. The difficulty that we have as a legacy OEM, and by the way, I'm very proud of being an employee of a legacy OEM company, is that we have to unlearn all that we have been learning during 120 years and to learn from scratch. So this is the difficulty. It's a skill set, it's our facilities, it's our way of doing and developing cars, right? So, and since you talk about China, right, it's very important to accept reality, right? And the question is, are we worried? Yes. Are we going to surrender? No. We're going to fight, right? Like hell. This is in the DNA of the automotive industry. No matter what, we will be always there, right? So it's important to be clear on that. In that respect, what we have to be reminded is that China has not started that journey yesterday. This is something that China has strategically planned already in 2010, right? China has acknowledged that despite the years of Westerns being in China present there, the technology was not transferred. So they decided to leapfrog, technologically wise, right? So, and while we Westerns, we were benefiting from the combustion engine, Chinese was creating the ecosystem. And I say the ecosystem because there is only one single ecosystem with a standard technology, with a standard battery producers, that all OEMs, despite any kind of antitrust, they benefit out of it. As a matter of fact, today, an ex-China car is 6,000 euro more competitive than an European car, right? 6,000 euros. It's more than 25% of the unitary cost of the car. Okay, we have to ship the car to Europe. They will pay a couple of duties, but there is still a 2,000 euros difference. And the secret formula is one word: ecosystem and standard technology. And this is what we do not have in Europe, right? Because everybody is playing individually, right? And I think that many of the speakers today have made some kind of calls of action at European level to reindustrialize Europe, to make Europe technological competitive for the future. And it's all about less regulation. Europe is ultra regulated. It's not a stimulating business. It's just regulating companies. It's about creating European standard technologies and European ecosystems. Only if we are capable to set up that ecosystem, and Verkor and your role there plays a fundamental role, it's the only way to cope with a Chinese threat. It's a threat.
And that, I guess, brings us on, Diego, to your role. And I have to confess, before working with yourself and Bart on Verkor, I didn't quite realize the scale of the impact that you've had at EIT InnoEnergy. Can you tell us just a little bit about kind of your mission and just give us a taste for the sort of investments and the scale of the investments that you've made across Europe?
Sure, Chris. So what we're a company that we spot early stage innovators that want to disrupt the clean tech world. And we accelerate them to their dreams in a very short time and de-risked. And you would say, Chris, oh, many people do this. Well, why are we different? Just a couple of numbers. Our MOIC is 5.3. So 1 euro we invest, we turn around in 4.5 years, 5.3 euros. So it means that we have been able to crack also the profitability. Number two, as Reka was saying, Verkor, we created the company in June 2020. And last summer, also with the support of Macquarie and Renault as investors, we crossed the 2 billion rounding fund. So in 3 years, we're able to create industrial champions. Because the only way to make the energy transition happen is by big, scalable, replicable players. So that's what we do. And why are we able to deliver those results? Because of one word that Reka said, ecosystems. So we have been able to create over the last 13 years ecosystems of all the supply chain that enables to be able to pull out those results. And those ecosystems' ability has been proven by the Commission, who has given us the mandate to drive the European Battery Alliance from mining to recycling, just to create what Reka has identified as one of the key competitive advantages, if possible, be of Europe, that is to have one way of addressing the end-to-end problem. And only in EVs, we have got 50 investments today. Out of them, 3 unicorns. So this is what we are.
And just, I think you've made something like 500 investments.
Yeah.
Right? And just on the automotive sector in particular, I mean, there's some
50. No.
And some of those, obviously Verkor that we're involved with, but also Northvolt. H2 Green Steel has a really strong automotive angle as well, supplying green steel to that. So how have you sort of engaged with the automotive sector and thought about that ecosystem?
So just one word of H2 Green Steel. Any car, 40% of CO2 footprint is a battery on EVs, and 32% is steel. One car is 1 ton steel, and 1 ton steel is 2 tons of CO2. So just for the audience to craft what is a... And why have I been able to do those big things? Because instead of just trying to identify in which venture or which company to invest, first what we've done is we've created the market. So back in 2016, when we got the mandate from the Commission to create the Battery Alliance, Europe was nowhere in EVs, was nowhere in mining and recycling. So what we do is we first create a market, and then we spot the ones that can be able to, on the bigger pie, to be able to capture the pie. So we are not so crazy about who's going to be the winner. It's just about creating markets that don't exist. Same with steel. Today, Europe consumes 80 million tons of flat steel that is grey today. All the off-takers, they want a green steel. So we're just creating also, thanks to CBAM and others, a market that didn't exist. And then we just push the innovators to capture this. So it's not innovator-based, it's pie-based or market-based.
And Reka, Renault's obviously been around a long time, been a very successful automaker, but relatively small. I mean, given the mergers that have happened across industry, how as one of the sort of smaller but still quite significant national players, how have you thought about? You've talked a lot about sort of partnerships in developing the supply chain, because obviously the sort of complexity of shifting the way you do business is quite significant.
So Renault is about a 2.5 million car company, right? There are other big players doing almost 10 million cars. And the major question we were facing 3 years ago when we started our turnaround plan is, what are we going to do? What we can afford, right? And maybe it was just because we were not a rich company, right? That a magic word came across: smart capital allocation and horizontal cooperation, right? So, and also an attitude, being humble. So we will not do everything. We cannot do everything. There are players, actors in the market that do things better and faster, right? And we decided to team up, right? In the EV value chain, we have examples like Verkor. In the software value chain, we have players like Google or Qualcomm, where we rely, right? So credibility and technical competence. Second, a smart capital allocation, right? If we would have invested vertically in the 80 gigawatts we need in 2030 to accommodate 1 million electric vehicles in Europe, we, Renault, would have invested more than 6 billion euro, right? We have invested far less, right? Important is to find true partners that share the same purpose and are co-responsible of that journey. A journey to decarbonize the economy, a journey to guarantee technological European sovereignty in Europe, and a journey where we will share benefits and risks, right? And in that context is where Renault has decided to create the so-called first pure EV player in Europe, Ampere, which is a carve-out of 11,000 employees, 24/7 thinking, working, and developing EV and software in Europe, right? It's the European Renault Group response to your question, why legacy companies have difficulties. This is why we carve out. This is why we specialize. This is why we consider that it's a different sport. No compromise, 24/7 EV and software, right?
And I mean, how have you navigated? I think one thing that's, you know, as we've dug in more and through the Verkor investment, the shift in terms of raw materials and the complexity of those raw materials supply chains, both in terms of just availability, access, both in terms of processing, in terms of sort of ESG. How have you kind of solved that problem, or what steps have you been taking?
Well, actually, as I said, it's a newer sport. Even the way we plan vehicles, right, or our manufacturing orders, and how do we accommodate the batteries in between, in the stock, in the inventories, etc. It's a completely new sport. It's not as easy as it was in the combustion engine. So we have to adapt all our systems, right? And the lead time is not the same, and off-takes are not the same. Actually, off-take was not a word in the old times of the combustion engine. We have learned that word now, right?
Take or pay as well.
Take or pay as well, yeah. So nice words, right? Very complicated, scary words. But it's part of the new game, right? So and this is what we are adapting. We have to be more accurate in the volume planning, right? Not pushing many cars in the market. You see the impact in terms of residual value of some that have invested extra capacity and experiencing what does it really mean becoming mass producer in the automotive sector. So we are victims also of not controlling minings and critical raw materials, right? We have seen the slide of Bloomberg, so we do not control that. We are exposed. We try to hedge, but maybe there are ways, again, call for action, to find platforms, mutual platforms in Europe to bundle a kind of purchase power Europe to mutualize kind of that risk, right? In China, it's the state, it's the financial system, it's not the OEM that is taking all that risk, right? With all the buts and the gots that it represents. So it's not the same competition today, right? When we talk about China, Europe, or US. So we do not play with the same weapons, right? Or players. We play the same sport, football, soccer. We play with 11, they play with 15. So it's not fair, right? It's not fair.
Diego, apart from the 15 guys on the other side, what are the reasons why you think Europe could succeed or fail in this EV race?
So if you look at any value chain, the strength of value chain is equal to the weakest of the links. And the weakest link today of Europe, because structural, is upstream in the raw materials and processing and in recycling. That's the first point. And that can be addressed, as Rick is saying, hey, let's solve the upstream of the raw materials either by combining common purchasing, just to hedge the risk of the volumes, or like we did, we launched in Davos in this January a fund for developing mining and processing in Europe. That's one thing, the structural. The second is our enemies, our competitors, they are seeing where we are just starting to become real players, so they're dumping on batteries and then dumping on EVs. So Reka has to fight with BYDs that basically the selling price in Europe is not the real price if you put the bill of materials. In batteries, now there are some offers from CATL at 40, 50 euros a kilowatt hour, half the price. So they're using the muscle that because of a lot of funding before, and they can use. But we have three things that are winning cards. The first one is regulation. Although you don't like it, but this last year, we Europeans in the continent, we have decided that 40% of the 2030 demand has to be supplied by domestic supply. So it's a captive market. So that also for financiers is tremendously good news. So we know that the single market, 40% of it by 2030 has been supplied by, in clean tech, by European supply. Tremendous. Again, it's another way compared to the Americans, but it's a very, very strong message. On the purely EVs, the battery regulation that is today the reference in the world obliges that any battery installed or sold in Europe has to have a certain CO2 footprint, traceability, so no labor force, no dirty rock content whatsoever, and circularity, so much recycled content. That's also tremendous long-term competitiveness. It's not going to be only on price, it's going to be also on those three tremendous long-term competitiveness. And the third, and I'm bouncing the ball to Reka, is last year, Renault 2.3 billion bottom line, Stellantis 18 billion bottom line. I think it's a time to do a little less of dividends to the shareholders and to double down and triple down in preparing and betting much more on the European value chains, on a strategic and partnership approach rather than on a procurement and buy approach. They've got the means, they're doing a lot of job, but I will ask them to do even more in terms of securing Europe as an end-to-end industrial champion.
So Reka, it's already clear that you guys are not going to fail. So how are you going to win? How are you going to beat the 15 guys on the other side?
Look, our response, I insist, it's Ampere, right? So there is no precedent of a pure European native EV player as Ampere, right? So I insist, 11,000 employees, one industrial hub in north of France, where we produce the 5, the Renault 4, the Megane, the Scénic, and other cars, with the supplier park around 300 kilometers, Verkor Gigafactory, Envision Gigafactory. So we reduce the logistic cost. The competitive of the plant is going to be at the same level as Eastern Europe, reducing the CO2 footprint, reducing 40% the cost of the current generation towards the next generation, benefiting from the new cells and chemistries, and especially because we will team up with the best. Verkor is one of the best, Google is one of the best, Qualcomm is one of the best. Because don't forget, we talk always about EVs, but there is another technological element, which is the microchips. And those two components are going to represent more than 60–70% of the future cost of the car. And those two components are in China and in Taiwan, right? So we can have the best assembly lines, we can have the best developers, designers, the best gigafactories, but the crucial components are not here.
We're already 50 seconds over, and I promised everyone that I'd.
But Ampere is going to rock, believe me.
I know. And I've been on the site. I've chosen.
Yeah.
We were debating.
1 million cars, we do it.
As this EV industry in Europe really takes off, I'm really excited to see the cars you guys produce, and also how we can get involved in battery manufacturing, recycling, the upstream processing. there's just a huge investment opportunity to support that industry, which is really essential for Europe. So thanks very much.